Welcome to Satluj News, I'm Angus Scott in London. India is the world's most populous country. It has the third largest defence budget, it's now the fifth largest economy, and it's a nuclear power. But more importantly, the nation sits as neighbour to the world's second largest economy, China. Since independence, India has fiercely followed a doctrine of multi-alignment. Over recent decades, the country has played a clever hand in the game of global geopolitics, under the so-called policy of strategic autonomy, whereby the nation does not remain neutral as the other superpowers tussle amongst each other, but instead takes clear positions depending upon the issue and supports whichever side offers the best strategic advantage to India, irrelevant of which side of the traditional geopolitical divide that position happens to be. Despite this, however, the question has often been asked why India has not become a closer ally to the US and to the West in general, particularly with the country's historically abrasive relationship with its weighty neighbour to the north, China. In fact, India has indeed formed strong alliances with the USA in recent times, over several issues, and has generally seen the US as a traditional ally. But this has been strenuously pursued in almost all areas except defence. In the past, particularly during the Cold War, India instead formed a tight strategic partnership with the Soviet Union, a relationship that continues even today. This is reflected, for example, in the extensive deployment of Russian military equipment currently utilised by the Indian Armed Forces. The diplomatic relationship between Russia and India remains strong even today. As a result, the US continues in its attempts to both manipulate and seduce India into working more closely with Washington, more to its frustration than success so far. And this demonstrates the complexities of India's position on the world stage. Whilst it continues to build and maintain strong relationships with the United States, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine generated a wave of global condemnation. Pressured to join in this global clamour against Putin, India was expected to join in the condemnation, but instead chose to abstain. While some see this as a vagueness and ambiguity in the country's policies and principles, in fact, it's increasingly seen as a fledgling superpower flexing its own muscle. As the world's fifth largest economy, India has earned the position of dictating its own terms to potential allies and creating its own global agenda. As the other superpowers compete for India's alliances, the country is enjoying cherry-picking not just who it forges relationships with, but the very nature of those relationships. India's relationship with China is also a major issue that has caused headaches not just in New Delhi, but in capitals across the West. China has fast become one of the most powerful nations on the planet, funded primarily by Western hunger for cheap manufactured goods. The influx of wealth into China allowed the nation to build one of the world's most powerful armed forces and to expand its ambitions beyond its own borders. The country's Belt and Road Initiative has allowed China to secure resources and infrastructure across the globe. At a local level, China continues to provoke India along the contested 2,100-mile border between the countries, known as the Line of Actual Control, where skirmishes between the two nations' troops have often resulted in fatalities. This fractious relationship between India and China has led the West to assume that India would naturally fall into alliance with the US and its other allies to contain the ambitions of China. Instead, despite aggression on the ground at a local scale, both the Indian and Chinese governments have fought hard to minimise hostilities and instead pursue a significant de-escalation of the issue. The two governments remain pragmatic and wary of each other, recognising that both nations stand not just as competitors, but potentially as pillars of a future world order. Having a good working relationship is thus seen as essential. Going forward, India continues to pursue an intelligent agenda as it forges its strategic alliances. Alliances that don't follow the conventional lines of the traditional world order. Instead, they serve to promote India's ambitions globally. India is using its growing global position to play off competing superpowers against each other, to the country's advantage. It continues to work closely with the US. It remains a proud component of the BRICS economies, including both China and Russia, as well as Brazil and South Africa. And it has recently increased its participation in the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, known as the Quad, with Australia, the US and Japan. All unusual bedfellows that, on the face of it, appear incongruous in the old world order. But India is not part of the old world order. Instead, the nation is looking towards the new world order. And it's clear, India remains ambitious. You've been watching Satluj News. I'm Angus Scott in London. Thanks for watching.